Recording.
Welcome into the Saints Insider Podcast for Wednesday, June the 19th. Zach Ewing with Matthew Paris, Luke Johnson, and Jeff Duncan. Norman Bell's our man behind the glass. We're going to do a little 53-man roster projection today for the Saints post-minicamp, pre-training camp, kind of talk about where we think the Saints ultimately land with their 53. Want to wish a happy Juneteenth to all those celebrating that holiday, and we'll be back with the pod right after this message from our sponsor.
Hoop fans, take the court with Caesars Sportsbook. Place your pregame bets now. Build parlays and same-game parlays, then combine them into super parlays for a chance at greater payouts. And with quick picks, Caesars turns the biggest stories of the game into pre-built parlays you can just tap right into. So don't just watch basketball. Download Caesars Sportsbook and experience it like never before. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
All right, thank you for being with us here on the Saints Insider. And guys, just kind of a natural time. A big talk of training camp is always who's going to make the final roster. Cut day is always a big day. Who gets kicked off the island, so to speak, who's in the practice squad. And we'll talk a lot about it then, but let's take a moment now, reset where we're at after minicamp with an eye on that 53-man projection. Matt, you wrote a story about it last week. You can find it on NOLA.com/Saints. Just about where, and even since then, things have changed. Juwan Johnson got hurt, things like that. So this may change, but some interesting roster battles out there.
It is, yeah. There are a lot of spots right now, very competitive. We saw in OTAs and mandatory minicamp that the Saints, they like to shuffle their rotations. So, you know, the receivers you'll see working together aren't necessarily, all right, this is the order of 1, 2, 3. They'll have, you know, a third stringer working with the first stringer. Like, they're very open right now. And that's something Dennis Allen said, is it's way too early that, you know, these are just part evaluations, that they still have to play the preseason games. That's a big factor in all of this. But with respect to Dennis Allen, let's have some fun and talk about it. I don't think there's anything wrong with spending a podcast or writing an article about it. You know, I enjoy the minutia of roster building, and that's what this one's going to be all about.
Well, and this is also just a good way to just do a primer on where the Saints roster is and where they're going to have to kind of balance this thing out. I think one of the interesting things while we're doing this is I think the new kickoff rules are going to probably change a little bit about how they actually construct the roster, how many players they keep at specific positions. It's going to be really interesting to see how that actually shakes out. But it's fun to kind of speculate on it right now.
Yeah, and obviously things will change. We're not saying they won't. We're just speculating. This is the Saints Insider. You don't come to us for casual information. We're gonna dig deep into some of these roster decisions. And Jeff, I mean, I remember last cut day, there were some surprises. I mean, obviously Blake Grupe and Lou Hedley making the team, probably the headliners on the specialists last year. But even in other places, there's always somebody who gets cut that you're kind of like, really? That guy got cut? And this year, probably no different.
Yeah, I remember Bradley Roby.
Roby last year, that was a big one.
Stunned on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen very often. I think we could see some of that this year, but just kind of scanning over the depth chart and overall, I feel like it's not a very deep team. It's not as deep as it's been in the past. Once you get past kind of the starting unit with this team, there's some areas of inexperience. And I think that's just a byproduct of them going through this kind of transition. And there's a lot of opportunity, though, for a lot of young guys, I think, to step forward. I mean, this team's going to need, like last year's draft class and this draft class, I think maybe more than some of the other teams they've had in the past. Those guys have to step into maybe backup roles and be productive when some injuries occur.
Totally agree with you. I mean, I think that's part of the issue with the Saints team is they have stocked the roster up with a lot of veterans in the last couple of years. But I mean, last year they were the oldest team in the NFL by snap weighted age. I think the oldest offense and the second oldest defense. You got to give the young guys opportunities to play. They're going to go through their growing pains, but like it's so important to develop that young core, and you cannot just develop them on the practice field. Like a lot of that needs to happen. They need to get out there and play.
Yeah, all 7 of their draft picks last year made the roster.
They all made the roster, but only Brian Brzee and A.T. Perry and Kendre Miller really, and Jordan Howden really played.
And then the specialists who are undrafted.
Right.
But yeah, the point is those guys are going to have to be ready to contribute this year, or they won't make the roster a second year in a row. And we'll see the same thing with this year's draft class. They're going to have to make some selections there and make some tough decisions.
Yeah, there are some guys that I haven't really seen so far, like Jalen Ford, their 5th-round linebacker. He's been coming back from an injury. So as we turn to training camp, like it's going to be a big opportunity for those guys. But I think the Saints are at a position right now where they can afford to, spot 51 on the roster to, have Bub Memes make it rather than some of the other receivers they brought in, like a Stanley Morgan. So, we'll see how it shakes out, and they're going to have to earn their spots. But I do think the way that the Saints roster is constructed, there is opportunity for those guys to make the roster.
All right, so we're going to dig in position by position. First of all, subscribe to the channel, like the channel, hit the like button, share with your friends, talk about it in the comments. Let us know where you think we messed up and who you would take over somebody else for the 53-man roster. All right, position by position, we're going to start with one where probably not a ton of intrigue on who's going to make the roster at quarterback. Is it as simple as Derek Carr, Jake Haener, Spencer Rattler guys, or do you see a surprise Nathan Peterman getting the job over one of the young guys? I don't see it at this point.
No, I'm just going to cut you off. No. No.
I was trying to make it interesting.
Yeah, we can make it interesting in other positions.
How many passes have you seen Nathan Peterman throw this spring? 3?
Nathan Peterman, this is
4?
like one of the funniest things about watching these practice. Obviously, like the guy has like value on this team because he has the experience within these offenses. I believe he was with Andrew Janoko at the last spot. So it's good to have him there to kind of usher these guys along within this new offense, add like another experienced voice in the room. But like it's funny watching these practices because they will literally let him have like one rep, and then they get him out of there and then put Spencer Rattler in. There is like almost no way that guy makes the roster unless like an injury happens to. Or 2 happens to the guys behind Derek Carr.
Does Nathan Peterman know that? Does he know he's just being paid to be kind of another coach?
Yes. He is at that spot in his career. He's a journeyman quarterback who's on, I don't know exactly what team he's on, but it's got to be 4 or 5 at this point. He knows what he was brought here to do. He knows they have 2 young quarterbacks developing behind the guy they're paying $40 million a year. Even if he goes out there and lights it up in the preseason, I just have a really, really hard time seeing him make the team. And the idea of him going out there and lighting it up in the preseason is so far-fetched because of what we've seen during training camp. Not because he's bad, but because he never gets reps.
Right. He'd have to play like the 3rd game when they're, the 3rd preseason game when
they just want to avoid injuries.
Plays, yeah.
Yeah, and go 12 for 12 for 250 yards and 6 touchdowns.
Go ahead, man.
I think the way we could also shape this is, they don't have to keep 3 quarterbacks. They could keep 2 if they really wanted to. And do they have to pick between Haener and Rattler? But the way we've seen it this spring, and I think Haener showed enough progress that I think it makes more sense to keep 3, but 2 is theoretically an option as well. And that's, I think, where, if we're talking about a competition between them, that's maybe where it could be. But
I would personally be shocked if they only kept 2 of them. Yeah,
same here.
It'd be really surprising, just because of the investment they've made both in Haener and Rattler, and full well knowing that if they waive either of those guys on cutdown day, somebody's going to scoop them up on waivers.
You'd probably have to trade one, but
right. Yeah.
But even then, I don't think that. I was just throwing it out there for conversation's sake.
For sure.
Taysom.
That's what I was going to bring up.
He gives them the luxury now having like another technically quarterback on the roster. So
yeah, but like the fact remains though that both of those guys would be like highly coveted on the waiver wire. Somebody would scoop. They have no chance of like sneaking one of those guys onto the practice squad if that's what they would try to do. So I just feel like it's almost set in stone that all 3 of those guys are going to make the 53-man roster, and they're going to protect them.
Yeah, barring an injury. Yeah, that'll be the 3 guys. So we'll try to keep a running count as we go. That's 3. Moving on to running backs / fullbacks. Again, you start with Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller. But here you have a couple of caveats. One is that Alvin Kamara skipped out on the last day of minicamp and is having at least a somewhat serious contract dispute. And then the other one is at fullback, where they brought in some competition for Adam Prentice, and now Xander Horvath is in the building. So what do you guys think ultimately shakes out at running back?
You want to start, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think they keep the three. I feel like we've seen Adam Prentice a little bit more than Xander Horvath. They're both fits for this offense. It's really just what they prefer, but Prentice is still pretty young, but he's a veteran as well. I kind of just give the edge to him. I was kind of tempted to put Taysom Hill in this group.
I was going to add, I mean,
it's just for like a roster.
Yeah.
I put him with the tight ends ultimately, but if you wanted to count him toward one of your running backs at this point, I mean,
But that's
we've
like,
seen.
yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about Taysom Hill is like, for a guy who plays like 6 different positions, I mean, he gives you depth at a lot of different places. You don't really have to count him as a tight end or a receiver or a running back or a fullback. It gives you depth at all those places.
Didn't Darren Rizzi say he's like the backup at 7 positions or something like that?
I mean, we'll do this probably in Friday's pod, but if you had to guess right now, do you think Taysom Hill ends up next season with more rushing yards or receiving yards?
Ooh, that's a good question.
We do a whole pod on that.
Yeah,
so-
I'm gonna say receiving, even though I still think his main, like the main asset of him in the game is going to be his ability to run with the football and all that. And I think throughout his career, like he's been growing as a receiver, but he's still not as strong there. But I still think that the way this offense has been designed and the way they've used him so far in these mini camps and OTA practices, I feel like he's going to have a larger role as a receiver in this offense than we've seen him before.
Is there any chance, given the increased role of Taysom in the backfield, that they go without one of those other fullbacks?
No, I don't think
No.
so. I think they still this offense still requires a traditional fullback. But I do think, like I was kind of leaning toward taking Xander Horvath from my 53 because I think he's a little bit more athletic than Adam Prentice, and maybe he can give you a little bit more with the ball in his hands if they want to use that in that position. But with Taysom Hill and what he brings as that kind of athlete, fullback, H-back, tight end, whatever, I think you can then look at your fullbacks and go like, who's the better blocking back, who's going to give us more in that area, and that I think Prentice probably does for me.
I think you're looking at 5 guys: Prentice, Hill, and the 3 running backs.
I will say though that also I think Jordan Mims has been really impressive in what we've seen, and if for whatever reason there's any issue with one of those 3 backs, I wouldn't discount his chances of making the 53.
Okay, that's what kind of answers my question, but I was going to ask, what if the Alvin Kamara situation does escalate to the point where they feel like they need to trade him or he holds out, and they're down that kind of bell cow?
Well, I think Kendra Miller would be that guy.
But as far as the roster goes, then Mims is maybe the
sure.
yeah.
I mean, I haven't looked at the cap ramifications. Is there any way Jamal Williams could get cut?
I thought about it. So you mentioned Bradley Roby. When I was doing the exercise, it's like, ooh, maybe he'll be this year's, but it doesn't. I think they don't save or lose anything cutting him.
So I mean, like if you really like Mims, I mean, who has looked good? He's definitely been a guy I think will be on the practice squad for sure. You could make that case, right? Let's go with the young guy. But if it's no cap ramification,
Yeah, I don't.
But the only thing that I would say to push back against that is that I think they clearly right now have viewed Williams as second in the pecking order behind Alvin Kamara. Every time we've seen them do drills without AK, it's always been Williams running first, Kendra Miller running after him, and then with AK, it's been AK, Williams, Kendra.
Yep, no
So he would have to really show that he doesn't have it anymore for them to make that move.
I was looking at some of those advanced analytics this morning.
Not good.
Jamal Williams worst in the entire league, in the entire NFL for yards over expectation.
Literally bottom among qualified running backs.
Right, and then
rushing
AK
yards over
is just above him.
Yeah,
I mean,
AK was bottom 5.
Yeah, so it's pretty stark, but you got to hope that the scheme and the offensive play calling improves that area.
Yeah, Jamal Williams, I guess the hope is that he bounces back. But we think he makes the roster at this point. Moving on to wide receivers. This is an interesting one. This one may be one of the biggest battles in camp and certainly something we're going to watch. Because honestly, after you get past Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, is anybody's spot safe? I mean, I guess we got to assume A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson are at least going to make the roster. But after those top two, the jobs are pretty wide open, man.
Yeah, this is the toughest one I struggled with. I only kept 5. That feels like could be subject to change. You could tell me 6. You could tell me maybe even 7, depending on how the rest shakes out. But right now, like, I left St. Brown off, Equimania St. Brown, but he looked really good in mandatory minicamp, at least the day I was there. On Tuesday, I only covered one of the 3 practices, but that's a spot that's really wide open. That third receiver spot specifically, Cedric Wilson, I feel like has gotten most of the playing time. I feel like at least with the starters. A.T. Perry's had some nice catches though. St. Brown has had his moments. We haven't really seen Morgan Stanley, Stanley Morgan.
Yeah, every time, yeah.
We haven't really seen Stanley Morgan as he recovers from an injury. Bub Means has, had moments here and there, but I think he's clearly behind the rest of those guys. But just a really competitive group.
Yeah, and it's also competitive in a way that's, kind of a little discouraging.
Oh yeah, Mason Tippin too.
Yeah, I like what Mason Tippin's done.
Fan club president.
Undrafted rookie from Yale. I think actually he has a decent shot of making it. And here's the thing that kind of bugs me a little bit about this receiver group right now, and it's just kind of nagging at me, is like you kind of alluded to, that it doesn't feel like they have a number 3 right now. A.T. Perry has made these flash plays, and some of them have been just like tremendous. You missed it at I think it was Wednesday's practice. They were running a goal line drill, and he just absolutely mossed Rajon Wright in the back of the end zone. You see those plays, and you're like, man, this guy can be special. And he did that a couple times last year at the end of the year. But there's clearly something missing for him right now, because every single time you bring him up to the coaching staff, they're like, he needs to get better in a lot of different ways. So it's, is he not running the routes the way they want him to? Is he not studying the way they want him to? It's hard to say. But there's clearly something there that like they want to see more out of him. So like, I don't know if I feel safe saying he's their number 3 right now. Cedric Wilson, I think, is going to be on the team. He's the only one of their free agents this offseason signed more than a 1-year deal. I think he's looked like he's justified the small contract they've given him. Relatively small, like about $2.5 million a year. But like, I don't know if you want to go into a season where like if either Chris Olave or Rashid Shaheed goes down, like he's your number 2. That feels a little risky there. It just feels like this is still an incomplete position group to me.
Yeah, and I would say if the exercise to take your best 53, I don't know if more than 5 are among the best 53.
I'm not sure more than 4. But you got to have 5, obviously.
They have to have 5. That's a minimum. But there's just not anybody stand up. But I would caution. I remember I'm going back a ways here, but 2006, Marcus Colston, famously was so bad early on, they didn't know if he'd make the team. And then all of a sudden, like the light bulb came on 2 weeks into training camp, and they felt so good about him they traded Dante Stallworth, who was the number 1 first-round draft pick. So like, things can happen.
Yeah,
the light bulb can come on.
Well, and that might be part of the reason they're like doing the public like pumping the brakes on A.T. Perry. They might see truly special traits for him, but they might be trying to push him harder to get that out of him. So maybe that's there. Maybe they're confident that'll get out, but they just need to push him a little bit harder.
One more question about that number 3 spot. Is there still a chance they bring somebody in from the outside to compete for that?
So I think there is, but like it's kind of tough to figure out how they're going to do that, because like outside of Hunter Renfrow, and I guess you could throw Michael Thomas in there, who has no chance of coming back here, the free agent market for like guys who you could realistically see as a number 3 option is pretty slim.
And so is their money. They just don't.
They got
$13 million.
Yeah, $12 million.
Do they have to? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, after restructuring Taysom Hill's contract last week, so like they have the cap space to do something there, but like, like I said, they're not bringing Michael Thomas back, so Hunter Renfrow is the only other like really accomplished receiver available in the free agent market. So like, unless somebody makes a cap move this summer to release a receiver, unless they make a trade for somebody. There's just not much out there. It's kind of slim pickings.
Yeah, at this stage, you're looking at journeyman and like. Remember last year they brought in like Kiki Kote and
James Washington and a couple others.
That's what you're looking at.
Yeah, Renfro's maybe the one guy who rises above that. So, but we've been waiting for them to sign him for a year now, and they haven't done it. So
street too. Every other team.
Obviously, they're not that
How much
interested.
of a market is there?
And he's kind of like, I mean, I think he had 300 yards last year. That's about what Cedric Wilson had. It's not really
Right.
like.
He's just had the bigger production before, and he did it
Right.
with Derek Carr, which is like you could see it there. But like it's been 3 years since he was like a Pro Bowl caliber player.
Yeah.
Okay, so further down the depth chart at receiver, if they keep 5, 6, 7, again, we think A.T. Perry is safe. We think Cedric Wilson's safe. After that, it gets a little more iffy. And Bub Means is the draft pick. You have a lot invested in him. What about EQ St. Brown? What about Morgan Stanley? I almost did it again.
He did it
He
again.
did it again.
Stanley Morgan. Stanley Morgan sounds like the investment firm.
He's a football player.
I know.
from St.
New
Aug.
Orleans.
St. Aug.
Okay.
Stanley
Morgan from
Played with
St.
Leonard
Aug.
Fournette.
Yes.
Do you want to keep going or just rattle off Stanley Morgan?
Yeah, I mean, he's a well-known local player here.
Well, I know his names. I just don't have them in the right order. But you have kind of this pile of receivers, for lack of a better term, and somebody's got to separate themselves. I just don't know. Like you said, Jeff, is it worth keeping more than 5 at this point? Do you have? Obviously, you need some depth. The Atlanta game last year, they're running guys out there with Olave and Thomas and Shaheed all hurt, with the division crown on the line. And you don't want to have that situation again, but I don't know where they separate.
Well, I mean, I think every team morphs to the strengths of its personnel, and I think this team's strength is not at receiver. So I think they could go with as few as 5, and this becomes more of a running team. And it'd help if Juwan Johnson were hurt. We haven't talked about tight ends, but I think they've got some issues at a number of positions with guys like that. We don't know where they're at health-wise at this point while we're doing this podcast. But I think 5 would be the bare minimum. You can't go into I've never seen them keep less than 5 receivers.
you have to.
You have to have at least 5. I would bet they keep 6 just with the new return rules as well. We haven't. I haven't been super impressed by Jermaine Jackson, but we haven't really seen him do like live action returning yet. That was his forte at Idaho. I think Mason Tipton can offer you something as a returner. So one of those guys might make a push for like the 6th receiver spot. I'm really interested to see like once kind of Bub Means gets his feet wet a little bit, if we're able to see more out of him. Because it's been tough for him, just kind of coming in as a 6th round rookie. I think 6th or 5th.
5th, I believe.
Late round.
5th round. Christian Boyd was the 6th round.
Late round rookie. Those guys have no guaranteed spots on the team, so I don't know. I'm kind of leaning towards 6. I think my 6 would be Olave, Shaheed, Cedric Wilson, A.T. Perry,
Bub.
St. Brown.
Probably St. Brown. But when you're looking at that last spot, it's probably going to be like a special teams guy. So it wouldn't surprise me if it's, even though we haven't seen him at all, if it's Stanley Morgan or if it's Mason Tipton.
Jermaine Jackson. Yeah.
Yeah, Stanley Morgan made his mark as a
special team
gunner,
yeah.
big-time special teams guy.
Right. If you keep 6, though, you're going to have to cut somewhere else, which keep that in mind as we
All
go.
right. So if we keep 6 receivers, I believe we're at 13 right now. We'll move on to tight ends, and that's not counting Taysom as a running back. So we need to count him here. So you have Taysom, you have Foster Moreau, you have Dallin Holker. Am I saying that right?
Dallin Holker.
Holker. And then the 4th one would be Juwan Johnson, who is not going to be ready for training camp. That was the news from last week. Saints are in kind of a pickle here, too.
Jimmy Graham's out there. Rowing the Arctic.
They're in a pickle as far as like bodies for training camp. But if like Juwan is going to be back in time for the start of the regular season, even if he's only got like 2 weeks of camp, it's not ideal at all. But as long as he's back in time for week 1, I think they're okay. It's if he was going to be forced to miss the first month of the season or 6 weeks or something like that, I think you'd start to get a little bit more worried. But like he's going to be on the 53, like they have to carry him because they're not going to be putting him on IR.
Right. So he's there. Foster Moreau has been a starter in this league before. I mean, it's not that they don't have quality here. We're counting Taysom as a tight end. He's obviously going to make the 53. The last one will be Holker.
Yeah.
Undrafted guy. I think he's going to make this roster, though. I mean, he's playing above Morrow in a lot of instances in practice.
Yeah, I do too. I think he's looked really sharp. I think Michael Jacobson is another guy that we haven't talked about, but I think he's looked kind of sharp. But Holker, they gave him such a big signing bonus. This team normally likes undrafted free agents, right? At least one.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he would be kind of your one, I think, at least on offense. And that he's just had a nice spring. He's a big body. That I'm kind of more intrigued by his upside than keeping a guy like St. Brown. That's why I had 4 tight ends versus, you could have 3 tight ends and 6 receivers, or you could take away from the defense later. But I just had 4 tight ends right now. I think Clint Kubiak, this is an offense that will really utilize tight ends, and we'll see it.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that. 4 tight ends. I think they are those 4. I mean, obviously, the one thing that we haven't seen yet from Dallin Holker, he's clearly a good pass catcher and a receiver at tight, like a move tight end who can help you if Juwan Johnson is going to miss time in the regular season. But the knock on him coming out of college, and is something that we haven't seen because they haven't been in pads, is whether he's physical enough to play the position at the NFL level. If that's really a weak spot for him, it's tough to keep a pass, like a receiving only tight end, as a backup on your roster if he's not giving you juice at other spots.
It is, but with only 46 dudes active every week, you could keep a developmental spot theoretically and have him do it.
Have him be a game day inactive you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he would likely be anyway, even if he could block.
Yeah, it's what they did last year with a number of their draft picks.
Yeah,
and just kind of stashed them as inactives.
And I think Foster's bulked up because he knows he's the blocking guy now. I mean, we really don't have anybody else that's really technically a blocking tight end, inline tight end.
Which is why his spot feels very safe.
Yeah, but I'm with Matt. I mean, I think I lean towards, especially with Juwan's injury, keeping more tight ends. And if you're keeping the best 53, I think there's 4 tight ends there.
Okay, so we're keeping 6 receivers. We're now at 17. Moving on to offensive line.
I might be the only one keeping 6.
I'm keeping 5.
I mean, that's kind of your pivot point here. So we're either at 16 or 17. Keep that in mind as we go forward. Offensive line, the starting 5 we saw in training camp. We saw Tali Fuanga at left tackle. We saw Nick Saldiveri mostly at left guard. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And then Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, and Trevor Penning at right tackle. So those 5 certainly will make the roster. After that, and Ali Udo was hurt, so he's probably going to make it when he comes back. After that, I'm of the frame of mind that the Saints are going to keep more versatile guys who can back up multiple positions. And that's typically what you do at O-line anyway, but this group feels especially crucial to have that versatility.
Yeah, that's what I did. I mean, Lucas Patrick, I think, is a pretty one-for-one Max Garcia replacement, a guy who can play center or guard. Let's see, did I have? I can't remember if
Landon
I had.
Young.
Landon Young.
You did have Josiah
I did
Zyram
have
and Landon
Josiah
Young.
Young. That's the spot that maybe could go either way as a developmental thing, but I think they're intrigued by his upside. But yeah, Landon Young would be the swing tackle. Ali Udo could be a swing tackle or guard. We've seen Landon Young this offseason play left and right, and so I think that's interesting if they need him to be an actual swing tackle rather than just Penning's backup. And then I think the thing we should also say, even though, no Ryan Ramczyk just because of where he's at injury-wise.
Yeah, obviously, if he magically gets healthy, he's going to be on this list, but we don't expect that. So after the starting 5 from minicamp, Matt had Ali Udo, Landon Young, Lucas Patrick, and Josiah Zyram. Do you guys agree with that list and that number?
Yes, I do. And I think Josiah Zyram's very much a stash as an inactive player, but he would be one who I think is kind of one of those guys who you don't want to expose to waivers, even though you doubt he's going to be ready to contribute this year. just because like the traits are so good there that the chance of somebody snapping them up, I think, might be more than the Saints want to risk there.
I think he could definitely be. I disagree. I think he could go the practice squad.
Yeah,
I think they could keep 8 linemen. They've kept 8 linemen before.
There are tons of guys in the NFL. Like, where's the bell?
There we go.
There you go. Thanks,
Norm stole it, but
I feel a Commander's reference.
There is a Commander's reference. In Washington, we called it Ashburn syndrome because they practice in Ashburn, but that was the term referred to, oh my God, you can't let this guy go because he'll get picked up. They were never picked up. Now, New Orleans is a lot better of a franchise than Washington has been, but there could be some of that here where teams over value their own players and are worried about it. But I do think he's an intriguing prospect who has a lot of upside, but there are guys that can slip past and go to practice.
If we went 8 or 9, what would it like? What's the number? What are we at on offense?
I had not. So if we have 5 receivers,
if you have 5 receivers and 9 linemen, you are at 25. If you have 6 receivers and 9 linemen, you're at 26. So you're taking away from the defense
26 offensive players.
Yeah. You count 3 specialists, that leaves you only 24 defensive players.
It's usually the 3 specialists, then you go 25 on each, and then if you have a stronger defense, you get up with 26. That's how it works. I think there's more good defensive players on this team than offensive players.
Yeah, that's
so
fair.
I would lean toward 26 if I were going to split it one way or the other.
But you would take away a lineman versus a 6
But
receiver.
I do think the injuries, right? I mean, the injuries to Ramczyk and Juwan Johnson kind of muddy the waters here. We don't, there may be depth issues there that they have to address if those guys aren't ready.
Yeah. Also, I mean, we just need to understand that they did create $6 million or $6.6 million in cap space. I don't think they do that just because. They might. I feel like they're doing that to create space to sign somebody.
Yeah, sounds
so
like
maybe that's an offensive lineman. Yeah, maybe they went through and they're like, not comfortable with where Trevor Penning is after minicamp. This feels like one that could really change a lot in the next couple weeks.
And unlike receiver and tight end, there are some O linemen in the free agent market who now they all have their warts. They all have either injuries or production questions or whatever. But there's more names out there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the big one out there is David Bakhtiari. Obviously, I think a couple times All Pro, but he's played like 12 games the last 3 years. And then you've got Matt's guy, Charles Leno, who had hip surgery in March, former Commanders left tackle, and Donovan Smith, who has just been like a functional, decent left tackle, never great. But I mean, he started at left tackle for the Super Bowl champion last year, Kansas City Chiefs. He's still out there. So there's options. Guys who have proven ability to start at the NFL level. It's just a lot of questions around those guys.
I feel like that adjective "functional" actually fits. Like if the Saints were putting out a job ad, it would be seeking functional tackle because that's kind of what they were missing at times.
I don't know about you all, but I feel like that starting 5 is going to be the starting. That 5 we've seen is going to. I'll be surprised if it's not those 5 now.
I think I agree with that. I just I do think the restructuring of Taysom Hill's contract just has me thinking like they got to be planning another move of some kind here because like the Saints are not a team that can afford to just like push money into the future just because. And
they purposely were trying not to do that this offseason. So the fact that they did it one more time with Taysom's contract, there's something's up.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily related to Kamara, right? You could look at that, are they opening money for him? But that's not really how it works because if they redid Kamara's deal, it'd be future money.
Yeah,
this is money for right now.
Yep. Okay, Saints Insider Podcast. We're going through our projected 53-man roster here in the middle of the offseason. Appreciate you watching. Hit the like button, subscribe button, and we'll keep on rolling into the defense. Starting with defensive ends. Probably a pretty set group here. You kept 5, Matt. We have Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, Chase Young, Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey. The injury to Tano Passignon kind of made this more cut and dry.
Yeah, it did, and it really kind of ruined the fun of it because I was actually really interested to see whether they'd what would happen between Peyton Turner or Isaiah Foskey. I think Isaiah Foskey, I mean, no pads, but he had a strong spring. At least he needed to show at least something, and I think he showed that. Peyton Turner, he seems fine. It's just not. It's not a group that even has like a interesting like, oh, who's that? You know, it seems pretty cut and dry. I guess if, you know, depending on what happens with Chase Young, if he's maybe not ready for the season opener, then you could begin the season on IR or something, and they'd only keep 4. But it just seems like that's going to be the 5, and that's that.
Yeah, completely. This is like the closest thing to quarterback on this roster where it's just you see what it's going to be, and you have a hard time seeing anything else.
Yeah, even though I'd love to get Nico Lalos on the team. That guy's,
Last year's preseason stud.
I know.
He had
It's
like 3 sacks in a
he's
preseason
actually,
game last year.
seems like he's got some ability. I always wonder like why he keeps coming back here where the end position's kind of stacked. Maybe he just likes being on the roster and getting a free paycheck without playing.
Yeah, maybe have you talked to him for your New Orleans restaurants thing yet? Because
No.
maybe that's why he's here.
Could be. I mean, but it is interesting. I mean, he's back and he's actually a pretty good player, I think. This is cut and dry, though. You guys are right. I mean,
All right. Hypothetically,
those
then,
5.
of those 5, let's say Passignon is here. Who are you cutting? Who's the most likely to get cut? At this
I think
point?
Tano's.
Turner.
I think Tano. But
No.
Tano would have been.
Oh, you think Tana would have been
yeah, I
cut
think
if he
he
was
would be
here?
cut.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff. I mean, he's been a solid player for you, but I think out of that group, you still roll with the younger players and somebody with some potential upside there.
This is Peyton Turner's 3rd last chance, by the way. He's just got to show something.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Well, he's got to stay healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, he's shown stuff.
That's true.
Yeah.
when he's
he's
got
got
on the field, but
ability.
he's never on the field. So
I mean, he's on the all-airport team. I mean, he looks the part. Walking through the locker room, you're like, that's what you want your defensive end to look like.
Yeah.
You know, he just has been able to get on the field. But sometimes these guys take a little time, you know, like defensive linemen emerge late. It happens all the time in the league.
So pretty cut and dry group of defensive ends. Defensive tackles, I think it's mostly the same here. There's more question marks. But if they're going to keep 4, Matt, Brian Bresee obviously is going to be one of them. Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard, and then you threw the draft pick Christian Boyd in this list too.
Yeah, this one also seems pretty cut and dry to me. Christian Boyd is your Malcolm Roach replacement. I think he's actually looked pretty good.
I agree.
Seems like he could provide some run stuffing to that. Like, you could tell me his snaps are like pretty strong. I'd be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Nathan Shepard, we didn't see a lot of him in OTA. We didn't see him at all in OTAs. Saw him at mandatory minicamp. I just penciled him in because he's a veteran guy. They brought him in last year. Then the other 2 are just like clear, obvious starters for me.
So I agree with you that this looks like this looks pretty cut and dry. But like I don't know, man. I didn't see anything out of Nathan Shepard last year.
He was just kind of
He
there.
played a lot of football, and like the only time I ever noticed him was when he was getting buried like 10 yards behind the line of scrimmage. So like, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's just being unfair, and it's just me noticing a couple bad plays.
All right, but could this be the spot where
like-
that money's for? I mean, could they
Yeah.
go out and get somebody here?
Well, I
Well,
don't
who are you
know.
gonna get?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's like this in particular. I mean, I think you could really only point to two position groups where you could see guys who could be like impact players, potential impact players, and as far as what's available in free agency right now, and that's safety and potentially offensive tackle, or where you talk about like upgrades. I think, like, I might keep Kendall Vickers over
Yeah.
Nathan Shepard. I think Kendall Vickers has looked decent. I mean, for what we can see in shorts and t-shirts for defensive tackles and interior linemen, it's hard. But I really wasn't impressed by Nathan Shepard last year, and I know I think they redid his money again this offseason, but
Sounds right.
I don't know. I think they're much higher on him than I am.
So,
9 sounds like 9 defensive linemen.
yeah. But you would have.
I would have 4,
Vickers.
yeah.
But you'd have Vickers
I'd
as
have
one of
4
your 4.
tackles, yeah.
yeah.
Cool. I like the
I like the little
take.
outside the box thinking. I
Yeah.
like
All
it.
right.
Yeah, I just like, even if you cut Shepard, I don't think you're eating that much money there. It's just like, I was really, really unimpressed last year.
Well, hopefully he doesn't watch this.
Or maybe it's some motivation, some bulletin
Yeah, I
board.
mean,
okay.
if he disagrees with it, he can show me the film and tell me why I'm an idiot. Wouldn't be the first person to do that, but I think they could get better there.
Yeah.
All right. So that's 9 defensive linemen, depending on whether you went 6 receivers, 9 offensive linemen, or 5 and 9 or 6 and 8. You were at 25 offensive players. Now we're at 34. Moving on to the linebackers, probably outside of receiver, the group where we're going to see the most competition in training camp. Obviously, Demario Davis is your headliner. Pete Werner is a returning starter. They signed Willie Gay to come in and kind of bring another element. After that, though, guys, and Matt, you went Kalike Hudson, Jalen Ford, DeMarco Jackson, but this is a very interesting group.
Yeah, honestly, kind of think this is the most stacked position secretly on the roster. I think it's just as competitive as wide receiver is. There are just a lot of dudes here. We didn't even see Nephi Sewell as he's recovering from a torn ACL. I left him off. I kind of already regretted that after I hit publish. It's just a really, I think it's a good group too. I think Kalike Hudson has been strong in this offseason. DeMarco Jackson is another special teams guy I think could contribute. And they're just, even number 48, I always forget his name, Isaiah.
No, you think
Stallberg?
Or 44.
44,
44,
yeah.
sorry. 48 JT.
Yeah, the drafted
44
guy.
is, he's been solid too. It's a good group. There's a lot of talent there.
Yeah, I agree with you. Top 3 is obvious.
Yeah.
How many did you keep here?
I kept 6.
6. Yeah, I mean it's either 5 or 6. That's usually the number for linebackers, right? I don't think they can keep just 5.
And I had Jalen Ford as my last. After the 3, I had Hudson, Ford,
DeMarco Jackson.
DeMarco Jackson.
Yeah, and let's not forget that we haven't seen a lot of Jalen Ford. Obviously, he's been recovering, but like he was like a special team standout at Texas in addition to being their starting Mike linebacker. I think there's an opportunity for him to make the team there. We haven't seen a lot out of DeMarco Jackson since the Saints drafted him. He missed most of his rookie year with injury, and last year was almost exclusively in a special teams role. I just still don't really know what's there with that player. Kalike Hudson, he's proven at the NFL level. I think he could earn a spot. I don't know. It's a tough group to evaluate because I do think, like, I agree with you, they've got a lot of players there.
I think this is the group. To your point about the new kickoff rules, like these backup linebackers, that's where they're going to make a lot of their hay.
Yeah,
you're going to see a lot of those guys on the kickoff team, and so Hudson fits in that regard. And I've heard a lot of good things about Jalen Ford from people around the league and the team. We just haven't had a chance to see much of him.
I think Willie Gay could end up playing a bunch of special teams.
I think he could play a lot of defense.
That guy's a rocket, man.
Too.
He's a heat-seeking missile. Like he's what you think of when you think of an NFL linebacker.
Yeah. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they use that group because they play almost no base defense. So like most of their defensive sets are going to have only 2 linebackers on the field. I think Pete Werner's responded after kind of an off year and kind of the challenge they brought in with Willie Gay. He's looked really good. I mean, at practice last week, he blew up 2 running plays in the span of 3 plays behind the line of scrimmage. So they're probably going to split some time on the field, but I do think that Willie Gay's athleticism, the new kickoff rules, are going to make him like have a big role there in addition to whatever role he plays defensively.
And for what it's worth, I mean, DeMarco Jackson has been like the backup green dot guy on the number 2s.
Yeah, and this is the spot too where between Jalen Ford not being in camp and DeMarco Jackson haven't seen a ton of action. Nephi Sewell working his way back from surgery. This one's going to go all the way through camp before we make some final calls here.
Preseason games will be important.
Yep. All right, that's linebackers. Secondary, we kind of lumped together between corners and safeties. Matt, you had 10 on your list total.
Yeah.
Most of these are pretty obvious names. Talking your Lattimores, your Adibos, your Alante Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry at corner, Tyrann Mathieu, Jonathan Abram, Jordan Howden at safety. And, again, really deep position group.
Yeah, and then the rest, Ugo Madi, Will Harris, who they signed this offseason, JT Gray. Like, if you actually split it down by cornerbacks and safeties, I had 6 safeties and 4 cornerbacks, but a lot of those safeties can play inside nickel, which is why it seems so light at cornerback. But they just have a lot of versatility in this group. I think it's solid. I don't think it's like the best position on the roster, but there's there's just like a lot of solid play there, and this has been a top 10 passing defense for years, and I would expect that to continue.
Yeah. Ugo Amadi gives him position flex. He can play slot or safety. We saw that from him last year. I think he's going to have a role in their dime defense. They do play a lot of 3 safety looks, so I think it makes sense to keep. And JT Gray, I mean, his roster, like he's listed as a safety, but his roster spot should just read ST.
Gunner.
He's not going to play. He's not going to play on the field for you. But he's so valuable on special teams that he's going to claim a roster spot. So, I do think that is going to require them to keep multiple safeties, and I think also, I could see a chance here for their starting safety to change depending on the personnel they're facing offensively. You know, I think Jonathan Abram is going to be their base starting safety, but I don't think they're going to be playing him a ton of snaps when they're facing sub-offensive personnel. I think we could see Jordan Howden. Because Jonathan Abram, while he played well as a starter last year, there's a reason he's on his 4th NFL team, and he's historically struggled in coverage. Teams are going to identify that weakness, and they're going to exploit it if he's on the field for 100% of the snaps. So, I think they might need to keep an extra safety just to kind of play the matchups a little bit.
Yeah, 10 sounds like 10 is pretty cut and dry.
10's usually the number for you.
And that's why it marries up to what we're talking about. That if your best 53, I think clearly 10 DBs out of that group make the 53.
Yeah, so we have 9 on the defensive line, 6 linebackers, 10 in the secondary. That's 25. On defense, we had 25. On offense, just the slight disagreement, 5 receivers and 9 O-linemen versus 6 and 8. That may be one of the pivot points. And then finally, our 3 specialists, Blake Grupe, Lou Hedley, and Zach Wood, the long snapper. Last year, this was a big surprise. If we had done this podcast in June last year, we would not have had those names on them. Any chance of another surprise, or you feel like those guys are entrenched at this point?
Well, I asked DA about the kicker thing, and he did say maybe he's just doing coach speak, but he indicated it was a competition. So if Charlie Smith were to have a big camp, I guess you could make an argument for that, but I'd be surprised. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Charlie Smith. I think Charlie Smith's really intriguing prospect. He's got a big leg. Like he can connect on field goals from 60 plus, which is a benefit, even if like the Saints didn't go for those in the past. But there's also like a pretty high level of inconsistency that is completely understandable for a player who's brand new to the sport. And I think Grupe's looked pretty solid. So, and another benefit with signing the player through the international player pathway, Charlie Smith, who's from Ireland, is that he's like exempt. He's like a roster exemption. So if they decide to keep him on the practice squad, as long as nobody else plucks him off, they get an extra spot for him. So he's not taking up a spot. So they don't have to worry about keeping 2 kickers on the team because they get an extra practice squad spot for him. So I think right now it's Blake Grupe is pretty clearly in the driver's seat, but like Charlie Smith is going to be on the roster pushing him. And I think Lou Hedley's pretty clearly improved from last year just in terms of his kicking distance. He's added a little bit more of a spiral to his game, getting more out of it. He was dead last in the NFL last year in I think gross and net punting average. So they want to get more out of him there, and I think he's shown that. But their rookie punter is pretty intriguing too, Matthew Highball, another Australian left-footed kicker. He had a really, really good practice session the other day. So I think that one I'm a little less comfortable in. I think I'm still taking Hedley, but I think that's going to play out throughout training camp.
So we're not closing the door on more surprises there.
No.
I mean, it's hard to unseat an incumbent specialist in the NFL.
Well, and for all we know, like Charlie Smith could like have the light bulb click on when he's with an additional month of training.
Sure.
And he could be lights out in LA and take the job. I think there's a lot of different ways this can go.
I mean, I see him as like a classic guys, put him on the practice squad and see a year of development with him.
Totally agree.
I could see that happen. So
yeah, Zach Wood, safest spot on the roster.
Right.
Yeah. just to finish things up. So that's our 53. Guys, let's talk about just some battles you're looking at that maybe are a little bit under the radar. I'm gonna take linebacker and receiver out of this equation because I think we see those as sort of the free-for-alls at the bottom of those depth charts. What other position battle could you see a surprise coming in the month of August?
I don't know if I would say a surprise, but I definitely think there's some uncertainty in the running back room as far as the pecking order. We were just talking about it. Like I think right now it's Kamara, Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller. But this is an offense that really lacked explosive play from the running back position last year. I think that's the one thing that Kendre Miller, you're going to get out of him if like he's reading everything correctly in front of him, which not a given, but he's a really explosive player. And I'd just like to see what it looks like if he's running behind an offensive line that's making holes. Instead of last year where everybody's just kind of ramming into the line and getting 2-3 yards on every carry. I think running back's an interesting one and maybe an important one because like as Jeff kind of alluded to earlier, I think this could be like a run-centric offense. Something that's I don't know if any NFL team is going to be like truly a 50-50 offense. I think the Saints could be pretty close. Like 54-46 pass run.
Yeah, no, I think Kendre Miller has a clear path to being the backup running back. But right now they're just going by seniority. He hasn't done it. But I think training camp, preseason games, he could show enough to where you feel comfortable going with him. I haven't seen enough of Jamal Williams. I hate to be down on a guy. He's a good guy, but
he's on the hot seat.
Yeah, he just seems like one of those classic guys that's taken a lot of carries in the league, and that position is tough, man. You just see guys. You see guys in the NFL make the Pro Bowl, and 2 years later they're out of the league at running back. That's the way it can drop off.
Yeah, yep. Matt, who's a guy you left off of your projected 53 that you are having second thoughts about, or who you think easily could end up making the team?
St. Brown. I think he has some size at that position too. I think he's played special teams in the past. Even though he's a veteran, I just think that he kind of fits what maybe they need, and that was a tough one for me.
All right. So that's our 53-man roster discussion post minicamp, pre-training camp. Obviously, we're going to revisit that a lot during camp and during August. Have live shows coming to you guys from out in Irvine and coverage the rest of the way. We'll be back with you Friday here on the Saints Insider. We're going to have a kind of a fun little game where we look at some statistics and pick whether we think guys will go past marks, delving a little bit into the gambling world, the degenerate world.
Can we get your little green shade hat on?
I think I have a green visor at the office in Baton Rouge. I might pick it up on Thursday.
Please do.
So yeah, we'll talk a little over-unders on Friday and have a lot of fun with that. We'll see you guys there. For Matthew Paris, Luke Johnson, Jeff Duncan, and our producer Norman Bell, I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching the Saints Insider.